much. Happy to be here and very exciting to listen to today's presentation.
That's great. We're having terrible weather along the East Coast. Are you having snow or is it very cold there in Poland?
Yes, it is colder than usual and some snow. So yes, winter here.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, as people start to trickle in, we're going to share some links to some slides here so people can look at them, because our slides do have links to upcoming events, social media, Bolton EBikes, which is pretty easy to find online if you just Google it, along with other stuff that is important to people in the clean tech sector, including funding opportunities and technical support. So we'll get started in about a minute here as we have more people coming in. And we're getting more people than usual on the live stream. Okay. All right. So with that, I'm going to welcome everyone to the Clean Tech Meetup, or I'm going to welcome everyone to CleanStart Perspectives today. As people trickle in, we'll continue to share links to these slides, and welcome. So CleanStart Perspectives are brought to you by Sacramento State College of Engineering and Computer Science, and we welcome guests to share, what they're thinking about, what they're working on, basically to push a conversation and have discussion around clean tech, entrepreneurship in the greater Sacramento area. So we're going to be welcoming Kyle Chittock, founder of Bolton EBikes today, and we'll get on to him in a second. But first I want to highlight, we're supported by the Sacramento State College of Engineering and Computer Science, and they have a lot of support for entrepreneurs. If you're wanting to connect with faculty, go talk with Assistant Dean Jawa, Assistant Dean Shafizadeh. If you're looking to get senior projects, like if you're trying to do a little bit of design work, connect with students that way. Also, the Carlson Center has Cameron Law, Executive Director, who is creating kind of a hub for entrepreneurs to connect with. We are sponsored by SMUD, Sac State, Moss Adams, Weintraub Tobin, and Blue Tech Valley, along with people such as yourselves who support us through donating and other ways through our fundraisers. So if you want to support us through that, here's a link to our PayPal. We very much appreciate it, and we'll put your name up there as one of our supporters if you do. Some quick announcements. We have another Perspectives next week with Ethically. They won the CleanStart Entrepreneurship Prize at this year's Engineering Computer Science Startup competition. At the end of the month, we have our Clean Tech Meetup on the circular economy. So those of you that aren't familiar with the circular economy, it's the idea of thinking of something from the beginning of when it's created to its final end, and trying to prolong that as much as possible. Think about it as like recycling, repurposing, the 3 R's: reuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, and how that all comes together. So we're going to be talking about recycling solar. We're going to be talking about how to make sure that you can buy products and source materials more effectively. Additionally, I want everyone to pay attention to the Entrepreneurship Toolkit series, Startup Sacks, 1 million cups, or the Kauffman Foundation's 1 million cups, which Laura Good of Startup Sack is one of the organizers of. And there's a lot of funding opportunities coming up. CalSeed and CalTestBed are two of the ones we're always excited about. Along with at Blue Tech Valley, you can check out the Clean Tech to Market and the Rocket Fund, which provides support for early stage companies. And if you're like, how do I go and get this funding, or what's the best way to go and tackle it? There's grants for startups that Open Grants, one of our partners, is putting on. We talk with Momentum about how you write for grants as opposed, because it's a little different. You don't go and promise the moon, you promise to deliver. And another thing that I think is kind of really cool is if you've been looking in the clean tech space at a lot of the fundraising that's been happening, there's been something called SPACs, Special Purpose Acquisition Company. It's a unique way that companies have fundraised, and Moss Adams is putting on a discussion about it so you can learn if that's an opportunity for you. And as always, we record these and we put them on YouTube. So if you want to catch up with things, our last meetup is on YouTube about distributed energy resources. I encourage you to check them out because it's a great way to learn about what's going on. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Kyle Chittock, founder of Bolton EBikes, to present here. If you go on and look at Bolton EBikes, they have a YouTube channel that has a lot of great content. But one of the things that especially always impressed me is if you look at their Facebook group, there's a lot of activity and a lot of interaction and discussion going on. And I'm sure that contributes to their overall growth. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Kyle today, and I'm going to stop sharing and let him take over.
Okay, sounds great. Let me get this up here for you. Okay, everybody should see a nice close-up picture of a bike at this point.
Looks good.
I'm just going to jump right into it. If anybody has questions during, feel free to throw it in the chat so we don't miss it at the end. But yeah, I'm Kyle. I'm the owner of Bolton EBikes. I design and sell electric bicycles. I'm located in Grass Valley here in Northern California, and have been in this area for my whole life and for quite a few generations, actually. But electric bikes, hopefully most of you know, have been growing quite steadily over the last few years. And just to give you a little bit of numbers or perspective of the growth of Bolton EBikes, 2019, we grew 469% as far as revenue goes for our business. So that was a pretty crazy year.
Oh my gosh.
I did not think that was sustainable, but then we grew 580% revenue in 2020, just kind of exploding. Now, before I explain how that happened, I gotta pause a moment and kind of back up and start from the beginning and show you or tell you what didn't work. So I think that'll help clarify some of the questions about, why don't people do this for e-bikes or do that? Because certainly there were some failed experiments along the way. So I started the company it was late 2015, so about almost 5.5 years ago. And I wanted to start a company selling velomobiles. Now, most of you have heard about electric bikes. You probably have not, however, heard of or seen something like this. Now, as far as I can tell, this is the most efficient electric vehicle design that could possibly exist. It's basically an electric bicycle, but under an aerodynamic shell. I had calculated out back then, it'd probably be around like 1,500 mile per gallon equivalent. Unlike a bicycle, you could ride it in the rain and you wouldn't get wet. It's easier to use. It takes less power. You may get more range. There's so many advantages to it. But the truth is, nobody cared. And I hate to say it in that way, but when it came to this product, it was too weird. It was too different. People are scratching their heads like, what is it? Is it legal? Is it a car? Is it a bicycle? There's just so many questions, but really when it comes down to it, there just wasn't a significant market. I thought it was cool. I thought the specs were amazing. There are companies producing things like this at very small quantities, at very high prices. They do exist, but the general population doesn't want this. They don't understand it, and they don't want to. So that was the failed experiment, and that's how my company started, was trying to push that and didn't go anywhere. But I was still interested in bicycles. I grew up riding bicycles, and then I came across electric fat bikes, and it's kind of the opposite in a way. They're not nearly as efficient. You put giant, massive tires on it. But the truth is, they're good enough. They're way more efficient than driving. It's a lot easier than pedaling a bicycle. They get people's attention. They look cool. And they're just a ton of fun to ride. You hop on one of these and it just feels like you're Superman riding a bicycle, because it's easy. You can ride over everything. You can ride in the snow, on the beach. This may not be nearly as efficient as the original direction I had planned, but they're so much fun. That I found out was the real motivation, or the real driver of sales, is something that's fun. So electric fat bikes started taking off. I didn't sell complete bikes when I first started out, however. I started selling things more like this, motor kits for people to convert their own electric bikes. And more specifically, I started seeing some of the e-bikes, 5 years ago, that were coming onto the market, and they weren't very fast. They weren't as powerful as I thought they should be. They didn't have as much range. So I started selling things like different displays and motor controllers, throttles, more powerful brakes, basically everything I could think of that would make the existing e-bike brands better, or in some cases, help people convert maybe a bicycle they already had. Now, eventually, that got to the point where I had replaced so many parts on some people's bikes that I decided, I really just need my own brand of bike that has all of these upgrades already on it. So then I started building bikes. I was sourcing all of the components from overseas, but I was assembling every bike by hand. So each one of these bikes in this photo, for example, had to build everything on that bike from the frame up. It was a ton of work. It was fun. I liked it. But I realized that I would never be able to grow or scale if I was having to build every single bike. And at that point in time, back in 2018, so this is a few years that, I finally am producing my own bikes. I changed the name of the company to Bolton EBikes. Velo Mobile Shop, which is kind of what that first thing was. A Velo Mobile is where the name started. But I realized I needed something that better represents what I'm doing now, which is e-bikes. And some of you may be wondering why Bolton EBikes. That's not my name. I get that a lot, and I have a few videos where I explain this. But to make it short, Robert Ogden Bolton Jr. is the guy who patented an electric bike back in 1895. And it had a diamond frame, kind of like a bike like this, a battery in the middle of the triangle. It had a hub motor in the rear wheel. According to the patent, it had, 1,000 watts. Does it even work? We don't really know. His design from back in, the batteries probably wouldn't last, half a mile at those specs. But it was what I would consider the most equivalent thing to a modern day design. And also, Bolton, just lightning bolt, kind of invokes a feeling of electricity. And also, my middle name comes from my father, who's named after somebody in my family history whose last name is Bolton. And on my family history, they were born in Pennsylvania. Robert Ogden Bolton was born in Pennsylvania. It could be a coincidence. Maybe there's no relation, but that remains to be seen. So it just seemed like a natural fit. So that's where Bolton EBikes, the name, comes from. And then I started experimenting from there on different bike designs. This is not one of my bike designs, but it's from another company. Occasionally I'll get something like this. I put it on my YouTube channel. I send out emails. I kind of get a feel for, here's something a little bit different. Do people like it? Do they not? So I do a lot of experiments on what resonates well with people, and try and figure out what do they want. So this is one that I do sell at the moment. This e-bike is what you'd consider more of a traditional looking bicycle. It's got fenders, it's got a rack on the back. Everybody recognizes this as a bicycle, and they feel comfortable with this. Like, if they know how to ride a bike, they look at this and they think, yeah, I can hop on and ride that. It's not scary in any way. So this more traditional style or design sells very well. This particular bike has a lot of power. It's a 1,000 watt mid-drive motor. It has a large battery, so the range is easily 30 to 50 miles. That's kind of typical for what I would sell. It's something similar to this. And then some designs I put a bit more work into. So this one is called the Bolton EBikes Blackbird. All of the bikes I sell have aviation themed names because I'm a bit of an aviation nut. So modeled after the SR-71 Blackbird. In fact, there's even a little Blackbird logo in a couple spots kind of hidden on the bike. And that's true for some of the other models and names as well. But basically, this bike that I sell now is kind of a culmination of the last 5 years of gathering data and making upgrade parts. This was like, let's take everything I've learned, pack it into one bike, at an awesome price based on where the market's at, and just sell it. And those first couple of photos I showed with all the bike boxes in the background, those were all Blackbird bikes that are coming in on shipments now because these are selling quite well at the moment. So hopefully that helps a little bit about the types of e-bikes that I sell, how I have them made. So this bike I don't assemble here. Almost all the assembly is done overseas, and then the bikes are shipped over. So we just kind of have to do a final inspection, a little bit of a repackaging or beefing up packaging, and then we ship these out to customers all over the United States. International gets a little bit tricky with bikes, so we're not into that at the moment. So the United States is our target market for bikes for sure. Now, the next thing I have to go into is, how do people even know these bikes exist? How do they know I exist? And that comes down to YouTube. That's the driver of traffic. The sales have been growing quite steadily, and you may be surprised to know that I don't do any paid advertising at all. And I never have. I'd like to keep it that way if I can. YouTube is excellent for gathering data, getting viewers, getting information out there, and I've got some numbers for you. So here's this little spot over here on the left, 2 views a day. That's late 2018. So I had already been in business for 2.5, 3 years. And you can see that I basically was a nobody on YouTube. And then, jumping forward, I started posting consistently at that time. And things started growing to where right now it's probably more like 10,000 views a day or so on average. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we're at. And I'm working very hard on growing that quicker. And then jumping forward, this is the last year. So you can see, actually, let me go back one slide. You can see 65,000 subscribers roughly over that period from 2018 up to end of 2020. But out of 65,000 subscribers, you can see 44,000 of those were in the last year. So it's kind of slowly accelerating. So most of this is happening, recently, and I hope that 2021, this is, hundreds of thousands of subscribers added. An interesting thing about this is I've seen that there's definitely a direct correlation between the views we get and the revenue we earn. There's no denying it. I can almost, I could look at the future and figure out, okay, if I get this many views on YouTube, we're going to do this much in revenue. It's very, very consistent, very easy to track. So that's very interesting. And the other thing I find interesting, and I'll try and make this quick, is here's the estimated revenue from YouTube. So this is not revenue that I've spent or made. This is YouTube paying me to put my videos out there. So I don't pay to advertise, I get paid to advertise. That's the way I look at it. That's a drop in the bucket compared to the revenue of the business, but it's just totally different way that I like to do things. So, so now I have basically this e-commerce company that's driven heavily by traffic on YouTube. I don't want to rely on that completely. So I do have, I've always been very good about building up email lists and other things. And then to diversify a little more, in early 2020, I started a podcast about electric bikes as well. So not as big as the YouTube channel, but it's growing. We're up to about 6,000 downloads a month on the podcast. And podcasts aren't as big yet, but I wanted to get a start, what I consider early into podcasting, and make sure that basically I could have the biggest e-bike podcast, if at all possible. So that's why I decided to jump in that. And so we do weekly videos on YouTube and weekly episodes on the podcast as well. Now, all of that's been great. 2020 was a really interesting year for everybody in different ways. If you look at the numbers, you think, oh, e-bikes are great, things are exploding. But there are some really big challenges with bicycles, just the bicycle industry in general right now. I've seen quotes with lead times for components for bikes as long as 500 days. I personally have ordered parts right now a year in advance. So I am ordering parts for electric bikes, 6 months ago. I'm not going to get those parts in my assembler's hands overseas, for another 6 months from now. And then there's still shipping time from overseas to here. So we've got lead times. I'm putting money out for bikes that I'm not going to see for, right now I'm spending money for parts I'm not going to see till, maybe 2022. So that is where things get tricky. And I personally would not be surprised if we see a lot of e-bike companies unfortunately go under because the demand is so high that they actually struggle to get parts and pieces, and they can't withstand these just super long ups and downs. How is that going to be fixed? I don't know. Over time, they will catch up. One of the questions is, why not make the electric bikes in the USA? Definitely something that I think about a lot, and I don't have the answers on how to do that yet. All I can say is that right now it's not possible. And I don't mean that because I don't think it's possible. I say that because some of the parts literally do not exist. Brakes, derailleurs, shifters, tires. There are 0 manufacturers in the United States that make some of the parts required to make just a bicycle, let alone an electric bicycle. So we'd have to bring a lot of manufacturing back in or start up new companies to compete with stuff overseas. On the plus side, we have time because lead times are 500 days. So that means I got a year or so to start building up things like that if it's something I want to pursue. I do have some experience with making things. I actually have a machine shop here in-house as well, which in the past we were making medical grade type parts. But I have one machine running some e-bike related pieces now. And we're starting to slowly expand our manufacturing capabilities. So if there are further lead time problems, I can actually do my best to develop parts and make them here. How far that's going to go, I don't know yet, but I'm definitely keeping my options open. So that's my view on the e-bike industry as a whole. That's where I'm at. And yeah, so I'm sure there's a lot of questions about that now. So ask me.
Yeah, that was excellent. I know I have tons of questions. I'm going to let Gary start it off and go for it.
Well, Yulia asked, overseas, do you mean China? Do you mean somewhere else in Asia? Where are they being built?
Yes, excellent question. So the majority of e-bikes are assembled in China. There might be a select few that are in Taiwan. A lot of the components like brakes and shifters and derailleurs, things like that, are made in Taiwan, sent over to China for final assembly. China is the primary place where most e-bikes are coming from.
And I mean, you basically have a year to two lead time. That's a cash flow issue.
Yeah.
Did you go out and get investors, or is a bank certainly that would be unusual, but willing enough to finance orders, or how are you surviving financially?
Excellent question. So I guess the last 5 years have been good in that I started this business with $200 out of my own pocket, and that was all I ever put in. I've never taken on any investors, and I don't intend to at this point. So I built the business from scratch, always reinvesting the money and building it up from there. Now, some of that cash flow right now is handled by pre-orders. So bikes are sold out in advance. So the Blackbird model I mentioned, for example, the last batch I released for sale is scheduled for a spring 2021 delivery. So customers are expecting they're going to start getting those bikes in a month or two. They're already sold out. So those are already sold and paid for. Now I am still kind of hedging ahead because, I gave them a 2-3 month lead time, whereas I ordered the parts, maybe 6 months before I even released them for sale. So I'm still trying to cover and stretch that out, but I've just been using my own personal funding from the business from the last several years to keep everything rolling forward.
I see Mark Roast, you have your hand up. You got a question?
Yeah. Okay, where to start? What about purchasing in Taiwan and setting up assembly in multiple places around the country here? Systematize that and do that. Also, I'm in a battery technology startup, and we're looking at a 1,500 to 3,000 watt hours per kilogram when we get into production. It's non-lithium. Ceramic semiconductor when we get into production sometime in the next year and a half probably, and volume production would be under $100 a kilowatt hour. So we're also pioneers in solar, so we could put up little solar canopy for the bicycle would be sufficient, like for parking the bicycle would be sufficient to keep it charged. And I know somebody who's an expert at reshoring. She's one of the leaders in offshoring, and now she's a leader in reshoring. So.
Did you have a question about that? I mean, I can comment.
Would you you actually already answered the question about where was it coming from, and you could ship stuff in from Taiwan so is that something you'd be willing to consider, that you'd be interested in exploring?
When you say ship stuff in from Taiwan, you mean to do assembly here, or?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, figure out a way to do assembly here, do the tooling, and so that you can do it efficiently. And I know somebody who builds factories for cars and all kinds of things.
So just doing assembly here isn't going to solve any problems if you're still buying the parts from Taiwan or China, because their lead times are super long. So that's not really going to help. If you're talking about bringing factories over here to the US and actually making things like brakes and derailleurs, then that's something that I think needs to be explored. Personally, I have a notebook full of every single part that goes into an electric bike. What method is used to make it? How could we do it better or cheaper or cost competitive here in the US?
Wow.
So I'm looking into it, yes.
That's great.
But it's going to be a very difficult challenge, and I think I don't see anybody else just going forward trying to make it happen because it's going to be very difficult.
You might want to do a cooperative then. Have you considered a cooperative for the parts? Because then when I shifted from dietary supplement company to being on my own, I went to a wholesaler, somebody who dealt with a lot of different companies. So if you were to get a cooperative going of the bicycle manufacturers in the United States, and Specialized, for instance, has specialized components, but you could actually come up with something that that all the companies were buying from, because you could all now get 1 month lead times or 2 week lead times instead of 500-day lead times.
Yeah, I think it's going to, something like that would have to be required, because I'm not going to get into battery manufacturing.
No, I'll do that.
I think this is like a really productive area to kind of talk about, especially with, I know in Sacramento we have the California Mobility Center, which is, its whole goal is to figure out how do you solve, honestly, Kyle's problems of, it's all made over there. Well, how do you streamline it here and make sure that it's cost competitive? And I know they would absolutely love to get their hands on that notebook that you mentioned, Kyle, to figure out how they can support companies going with that. I want to call on Ingrid Roston to ask a question. I see your hand up.
Hey, thank you so much. Love these bikes. Fantastic. I have a question about that battery, though. Does it come off? Like when I pull into somewhere and lock it up, I can take the battery with me so it doesn't get stolen?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that's great. Fabulous. I really love it. Thank you so much for presenting today. It was fun.
Thank you.
And Kyle, tell us a little bit about your background. You said you had another business making medical grade equipment, or I think that's what you said, but how did you come from wherever you were to bicycles?
So I grew up riding bicycles. I was on a mountain biking team for a little while in high school, just did road biking, everything, just for the fun of it. At the same time, I was always into electronics. So when I was a teenager building, radio controlled airplanes, cars, anything electronic. I went to fairly local college here, Sierra College, went through their mechatronics program. And I've just always loved making things. So just kind of happened from there.
Well, that's your homegrown success story. That's great. So somebody here, Judy Notley, asked, how much do your bikes weigh? And are you considering other models and designs? And of course, somebody's going to ask you, and I'll do it for them. How much do your bikes cost?
I'll get questions. Weights can vary for e-bikes anywhere from, 30 pounds for something small and light on the low end. But more typical for what people are buying, probably like 60 pounds plus is the weight range they would be in. Are we considering other designs? Yes, I always have more designs in the works. So I have several new designs that are being worked on right now. And then cost ranges anywhere from what I've got, say $1,500 on the low end to around $5,000 on the high end.
Now, I'm actually looking at getting an e-bike in the next year or so, because I don't drive as much as it is. But what's something when someone's buying an e-bike they should consider, or that if they don't consider, they're going to regret?
The biggest things people are asking about are range. How big is the battery? How far can you go? How much power does it have? So if you live in an area with lots of hills, does it have enough power to actually help you up the hills so you can commute to work or just go ride for fun, whatever you're going to do with it? I'm going to tell you 95% of my market, they're 60 plus years old and they're not using it to commute. They're retired and they're just having fun with it. But once they start using it, then they might commute for something, or they might go to the grocery store. They start doing what I feel like are the things people are pushing it for green energy. But the reason they start with it and use it is because it's fun. But range, how much power does it have? And then from there, it's really just a lot of personal preference on what sort of features matter to you. Some people want suspension, some people, want the big fat tires, some people don't. And that's just a matter of how are you going to ride it, where are you going to ride it.
I think that's interesting. And one of the things similar on that note, we had City of Sacramento talk about bikes, and they were all about e-bikes because when someone has an e-bike, they just ride more. And if they have a regular bike and they're not riding as much, what good does it do? If you're trying to reduce, if you're trying to be healthy or even just reduce vehicle miles traveled. I think we have a good question here from Brian Henry about quality control. You're importing a lot of stuff from overseas, electrical components, batteries. How do you handle the quality control on that to make sure everything's up to par?
Not easy. That's where most electric bike companies will import a bike in a box, and then they'll take that box from a warehouse and they'll ship it direct to a customer, and they probably never even look at the bike. I don't do that, and I never will, because my opinion is, based on all the factories that I've dealt with, and I deal with quite a few to kind of diversify the models and lead times as much as I can, I don't feel like the quality standards are up to what I would like. So right now, that's why we have everything shipped here to my facility, and we try and do kind of a glance over at each bike and check for damage and other things before we ship things out. I think that's the only way to guarantee that the quality is going to be good right now, unless you just build the whole thing yourself, which that's a whole nother topic.
Okay, I want to call on Michael Bell here because he's part of the engineering at the California Mobility Center, and one of their goals is to kind of bring manufacturing more, I guess, locally and develop manufacturing, but they've mostly, I guess, focused on large vehicles. Has the CMC thought about, hey, there's a lot of these smaller manufacturers that could use support?
Absolutely. So I've been listening and really taking key notes into what Kyle's been mentioning. There's a certain level of technical readiness, and I think Kyle's at that point where we can help scale and commercialize even further your product and your business. A lot of companies in the clean tech industry are still in the startup. Actually, there's a lot of ones that approach us that are in that startup phase, that first article prototype phase, but the CMC is particularly setting up to support companies like Bolton. So we can talk more about what other support you need, what other services that can be beneficial to you. But another thing we're looking at, we applied for a grant and High Roads Training Partnership Grant to the California Workforce Development Board. And one of the key focus there is helping transition manufacturing companies. This goes back to your point about supply chain. Help transition manufacturing companies out of the oil and gas industry and into providing support for clean tech industries across the board. So that transition, taking their capabilities and their manufacturing processes and repurposing it to make products for electric mobility industry is going to be one of the key focal points over the next year or so. So there's a lot of opportunity to see how we can leverage the CMC resources and partnerships.
Oh, that's good to hear. And I'm always curious as how that works out, because one thing that Kyle mentioned, and I've heard a lot of other entrepreneurs in the kind of personal mobility space like Chris Wiggins and Mars Cycles, is that their companies have been bootstrapped, and being able to work with large partners sometimes is a little kind of, I guess, doesn't always fall in line with how you kind of bootstrap yourself. So, I always hope that the California Mobility Center considers, what's going to provide the most benefit to entrepreneurs that are looking at, hey, I want to keep a lot of this stuff internal. But with that, I'm going to ask Kyle, do you have any closing comments for us?
No, I don't. Hopefully that gives people a little bit of perspective on where things are at. And that's what I want to do. So, what's out there. E-bikes are at a point where people want them, they're ready to market, and they're going to keep selling. There's going to be some challenges, probably a lot of changes over the next few years. And hopefully I can make some of those happen.
All right. Thank you very much. I want everyone to give a round of applause to
Yeah,
Kyle.
round of applause, Kyle. That was a great job. I'm ready to put in my order and wait 2 years.
Not that long.
So that's typical of these sessions. Had no idea you were doing all that right here in our neck of the woods. So fantastic to learn about all of that. So anyway, Thomas.
Yeah. So if you want to connect with Bolton Bikes, check out their website, check out Kyle on LinkedIn. Also check out their Facebook group. There's a lot of activity that they're doing there. That's actually how I was able to connect with Kyle. So I encourage people to do that. Our upcoming perspectives next Thursday with Ethically and our Clean Tech meetup on the circular economy later in the month. Make sure that you're connected with us, whether it's through our mailing list, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or any of these other things. Empower and YouTube. Hopefully one day we'll have a YouTube channel as exciting as Kyle's, but not holding our breath. And
so is your contact information on boltonebikes.com on that website? Can people get in contact with you, Kyle?
he just put it in the chat.
Oh, he did. Okay, very good. Oh, there it is. Kyle at Bolton EBikes. Okay.
My contact information to me directly is hidden on the website. So
Okay.
there you
All
go.
right. We'll treat it confidentially. All right. Well, it's fantastic. So,
Excellent. Additional thanks to our program sponsors and our community of partners. And with that, thank you very much for attending, and have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Yeah, really fantastic. See you next time, everybody.
See you next time. Bye.